Valerie Brown, Marisela Gomez, Kaira Jewel Lingo, welcome to the show. I should say that for Valerie and Kaira, it's welcome back. And Marisela, welcome for the first time. So we're going to talk about some practices that the three of you do to stay calm and sane in a topsy-turvy, tumultuous world. I'm a bit picking at random here, but I was particularly intrigued by something called the Four Chairs, and in reading the book, found it. I hope this doesn't go down poorly, but I found it kind of a little bit amusing. Valerie, your story about almost kicking somebody's ass. So why don't we talk about what this practice is, and maybe we'll get around to Valerie telling that story as well.
Sure. So this was a practice that I learned through a couple different teachers in the Plum Village tradition, though it's based on a nonviolent communication practice. Peggy Smith put it together, and I learned it from Richard Brady when we were teaching a retreat together. But basically, the idea is to bring to mind an exchange that you've had with someone that was painful, where you felt insulted, hurt, harmed in some way by someone's speech. And then to use, both the practice of mindfulness, but also the language of nonviolent communication, which is to understand the emotions, the needs, behind something happening, to kind of workshop that experience and to go back and sort of get a chance to respond differently than you might have. So there are 4 chairs, and each time you are the harmful phrase or sentence is said to you, and you respond differently from each of the 4 chairs. So the first chair is, you respond back to the person just like they shared to you. So you share all your anger, all your upset, all your, you blame them for everything. So if they've, said, in my case, the example that I used in the book was a racial slur where, I was on a train in Europe and someone, made a racial slur. And so the first chair, you just let them have it. You have a chance to say all the things that are terrible about this person, and how could they possibly ever say something so, whatever. So you can release your whatever pent up emotions you didn't get a chance to share in the moment, perhaps. But you are in touch with your anger and putting them as the problem, right? They are at fault. So you experience what that's like. And then you do this again. And the second chair now that you sit in is you hear them share this terrible thing that they said to you. And then you put all the blame on yourself. So you then, turn it inwards, like, oh, I must be, what did I do to be at fault for being spoken to in this way? So you kind of direct your own blame or judgment or whatever, emotional reactivity to what it is that you might have done that brought this about. And these are all just explorations. This isn't about actually taking the blame for something that we're not to blame for, but it's really to experience, it's to kind of make more extreme the things we do anyway in real life. So sometimes we do just put it all on the other person, even when perhaps we do have some part to play in the conflict. There are other times when we put it all on ourselves. So it's just to explore that, right? This isn't about like really harming ourselves in any way, but okay. So then you feel, what does that feel like, right? When you take all the blame. And maybe you find some little bit of truth of where, you were somehow a part of that situation, contributing in some way. Then you move to the third chair. So the third chair is you offer yourself compassion. So the person says this terrible thing to you, and instead of reacting to them or blaming or judging yourself, you turn towards what are the emotions that came about from them saying that to you, and you feel the pain of that in you, and you offer yourself compassion for that. You care for the emotional fallout of that exchange. So, you get in touch with, maybe it's humiliation that you felt being spoken to in that way, or rage, or absolute shock. And you take care of that feeling, because maybe in the moment you didn't get a chance to take care of that feeling. So you slow it down. You go back and you revisit that past in order to kind of process it, to digest it, to excavate things that may have stayed buried and not really, integrated. So you do the work of caring for yourself and the pain that came up. And then the last chair is you do the same for the other person. So you again imagine them saying this terrible thing to you, and then you reflect, what kind of pain are they experiencing? Were they going through in this moment that led them to say that? How can I, the same compassion I just cultivated for myself, how can I extend that to them to understand something deeper about what was going on for them, and open my heart in some way to maybe to forgiveness, maybe to acceptance of just, how crazy our world is, and how many people are suffering from so many forms of systemic injustice and, systemic confusion and delusion, and that they're also a victim somehow if they're saying these kinds of things that are so hurtful, that they also have been harmed by whatever system has indoctrinated this belief or view in them. So it gives you a chance to really take a bigger view of that one moment.
Just to put a fine point on this, this is a different kind of meditation than I think some people will have been used to, where you sit and watch your breath, and then every time you get distracted, you start again. This feels a little bit closer to loving kindness or metta, METTA meditation, where it's really using the thinking mind,
yeah,
in a very directed way to help you train up certain kinds of inner emotional capacities. Am I describing this correctly?
I think that's right. I mean, I actually don't know if this was introduced as a meditation, but more as an exercise. So you could do it as a meditation. You could do it in a lot of ways, where you do it live, speaking, with someone else. You could do this out loud, like out loud meditation. You could do this as a written practice, or you could do this quietly, reflecting interiorly what your responses might be in each of the chairs, and then what the feeling is in the body, what the experience is in the mind with each of these responses. So I know when I did it, it was actually very liberating to do the first step, because I didn't give myself permission to do that first step of getting really angry at the person in real life. And I realized that this would happen decades ago. I was 18 when this happened. And I realized that anger, that, that genuine, true sense of being harmed, I hadn't been able to honor that until I did this exercise. So it wasn't about, I'm going to go out and do something to this guy. If I, ever see him again. I'm sure he's, very old now or passed away. But, it wasn't about rehearsing, but it was really about acknowledging, oh, wow, this thing really hurt me. And I never gave voice to this part of it. And actually doing that first step allowed me to then do the other steps, which led to truly feeling a real healing came in this particular knot that I had from this encounter that had never been kind of massaged until I did this exercise. But getting to really let myself get in touch with the anger was kind of a doorway to the other emotions that then could come in.
You made a reference to going out and doing something to the guy who said this to you. So that kind of brings us back to Valerie. Can you tell your story?
Yeah. So I can speak to an incident that happened maybe about a year or so ago that really is emblematic of the four chair practice that Kaira Jewel just spoke to. And I have to say that a lot of this has to do with my conditioning. So I grew up in Brooklyn, and hence, all of the conditioning started there, So every day I have this practice in the morning of going out for high intensity interval training. So I run up a very big hill that's close to my house, and I run up as fast as I can. So I'm running up this hill. I'm going as fast as I can. I get to the top of the hill and I'm totally out of breath. And so there's this woman who is coming toward me, and she has a leash, but no dog. And so I'm panting. I'm at the top of the hill, and she says, "Well, if you see a dog anywhere, it's mine." And, between gasping for breaths, I said, "Well, I don't live up here." And she turned to me and she said, "Well, okay." And then she used the B word. And it's as though every part on my body was like set on fire with a match. I mean, it was an explosion. I could feel my heart explode with anger, the kind of anger you were talking about, Kaira Jewel. It was like a light was lit under my feet, and all the anger and the rage that not only was mine, but was like my dad's, my mother's, all of that came right back to me in an instant. And it was like, phew, and I paused for like a zillionth of a second. And that pausing was part of a practice that I had been doing over and over and over and over again, which is pause. I paused. And in that moment, I noticed the flash of anger. And in that moment, I was able to stop, not like slam her, not say something that would be harmful, but instead I just was like stunned. And she just walked away, and I stood there, and I was kind of like in shock. I was in shock partly because the practice worked. I could feel my heart. I could feel the anger, and I could feel the liberation that I did not have to have her ugliness, her anger, my anger. I did not have to react out of enmity and violence or whatever was going on with this person. I could let her have what she had without it becoming mine. And honestly, I stood there for a moment, and it was like relief and joy then came over me. I felt all tingly, and I felt like, wow, this is what the practice is. I don't have to be enslaved to my automatic, habitual patterns of reaction. The way I grew up, the violence, the poverty, the hatred, the whatever. I didn't have to be beholden to that. And so I kind of kept on with my walk as I walked a little bit, I then went into that kind of that fourth chair, Kaira Jewel, that you were describing, where I could have a little bit of compassion for this person. And I thought, wow, I wonder what's going on for her. After selfishly, I kind of took care of my own needs and my own feelings, because honestly, a part of my pattern has been taking care of other people and putting my own needs last. And so I deliberately and consciously said, no, hey, what's going on for me? Calming myself down. And then after I felt more stable, more solid, more grounded, I could then extend some compassion to this person and say, yeah, she's probably having a hard time. It'd be, it's probably a mess to lose the animal that you really love. And that was it.
I just want to point out that, in the book, you mentioned that when you say you're from Brooklyn, you're not from the currently gentrified part of Brooklyn that's now like filled with artisanal chocolatiers and things like that. It's a little bit more hardcore.
It's true.
When you say you've been doing this pause practice, what are you referring to specifically there?
Yeah. So in the Plum Village tradition, Thich Nhat Hanh has offered lots and lots of teachings. And of course, he's written more than 100 books on mindfulness. And throughout almost all of the books, many of the books, Thich has offered a couple of practices that I personally have found, well, more than a couple, many, but they're the practice of pausing or stopping is a very important practice. It's called shamatha. And so we practice taking a breath. We practice maybe turning down the radio, turning down the noise. We make a deliberate and conscious effort to create space. And so this for me was a really important practice, because a good part of my life was about running. It was the opposite of stopping. It was really about running from one thing to the next thing, from poverty to undergraduate school and graduate school and law school and the big and important job. And it's always, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? So the practice of stopping is to pause, to take a breath, to maybe move a little bit slower, to notice what's happening. And together with that practice of stopping, of pausing, there's the practice of looking deeply, vipassana. So we notice, like I notice, I stopped when I got up to the top of the hill. I stopped. I didn't habitually react to this person, to my own conditioning. And then I could look deeply. I could see the flash of anger coming up. I could see that if I said something, it was not going to be good. And then after a while, I could see that I needed to take care of my own emotions, that I needed to meet my needs, to provide for myself. And then, after a while, extending some empathy and compassion for that person. So when I say pausing, I mean physically stopping, taking a breath. And that may sound like, not a big deal, but with so much conditioned behavior, so much reactivity, this is a push-pull environment, polarized. It's so easy to just react, not even respond, to react out of habit. And so to be able to pause and not respond from these conditioned patterns is really, this is the practice. And I know lots of people can talk about this from a neuroscience perspective of, being triggered with the amygdala being triggered, being hijacked, or being able to speak and react from a place that's more grounded and stable, from our so-called window of tolerance or prefrontal cortex or any of these kinds of things. But from the perspective of Buddhist and particularly Plum Village practice, it's shamatha and vipassana.
That's very helpful. So we've got two practices we've hit on. One is the 4 chairs. The second is pause. I want to get to you, Marisela, for a third of what I hope will be many practices that we'll talk about in the course of this conversation. You in the book offer up a practice called mindful listening when people are polarized, which seems painfully relevant right now. Can you describe that practice, please?
Yeah, so this practicing when things are polarized, it's a simple practice of coming back home again. It requires the pausing and the deep listening in it, actually. So you can do this practice on your own, meaning maybe while you're sitting in meditation, doing your morning meditation. You can do this while you're maybe sitting by a tree or by the water. You can also do this practice with a person or in a group. And the practice is basically first pausing, as Valerie was describing. So that might be taking some breaths in and out with intention and dropping the thinking mind. For some, it might be sensing into their body if they're not able to do the breathing, noticing the breath. You can sense into the different areas of your body, bringing awareness to your feet or your tailbone or your head, your arms, wherever body might be touching a surface. And so you're initially calming, you're doing that pause. And then what happens during the deep looking? So we're also looking deeply. In this case, what we're looking at is maybe something that has really is sticking with us, something that might have happened, something like Valerie mentioned, or something like Kaira Jewel mentioned. We're going to, if we're by ourselves, we're sitting quietly, we pause, we're breathing. We might feel a little calm. And in that calm, there's more spaciousness, right? Things are settled. It's like the water is settled down, it's not as rough. And so now you can actually see deeper when the water is calm and clear. And then we're going to visualize and bring into mind something that just happened. Maybe there was the word, somebody said something that was triggering for you, a racial slur, or in the case of what Valerie mentioned, maybe she's sitting and taking care of that. So she's visualizing what happened, and instead of perseverating on that racial slur, she's going to actually bring into mind and her heart something that makes her happy, something that makes her feel good about herself. So that's the watering of the seeds of joy. That place we need to always come back to. We have to have a foundational joy so that we can hold the difficulty. Because if we can't hold the difficulty, then we can't take care of it. So we bring whatever has polarized us, whatever has caused upset, into mind. And we remind ourselves of our beauty. We remind ourselves of things that we're happy with, our ancestors and the joy of our ancestors and what they transmitted to us. And then we can actually bring into mind the other person after we've done that and we've sort of settled in. and what, or maybe it's an occurrence, maybe it's something we heard, and bring into mind something good about that person's, is invited to bring in their, so we can actually invite that in ourselves, in our visualization, that person sharing something, a happiness about who they are. Or we can ourselves bring that to mind. So it's really, the intention is to try to not get overcome by the differences, the polarization, and to come back to the things that are actually positive and beautiful about this very situation, this very, very situation that's causing harm, and that has caused harm. And then out of that, it reduces this sense of separation, and it maybe helps us to see that, just like Valerie said, that fourth chair is where we're going now to recognize the compassion is there, because now we're visualizing this person feeling sadness from their dog not being there, or not knowing where their dog is. And so it's that same process of taking care of things that cause separation, because that's really what polarization is, right? And we easily find the differences, and then we put them into their separate baskets, and we land in one of those baskets, and now we're feeling very safe in our little basket, and sometimes we're not able to see what's happening in the other baskets. So this practice with polarization, it's really about the wisdom that comes from compassion, because there is wisdom, right? This whole meditation, this whole mindfulness, it's really about finding the wisdom that's already inside of us, but often we can't touch because we're so like, and so it's the breathing, the pausing, the looking deeply, the listening deeply to ourselves and others. If we're doing it with someone, like it's a pair of people, we share first, and then we listen as the other person shares their feelings about who they are, their joy of who they are. And in that way, we kind of get to know a little bit, and the other person gets to know a little bit of who we are, besides that stereotype, that myth that is now occurring in the consciousness, maybe triggered by or activated by something that was said. So it's really a way to get deeper, to understand what else is there besides this thing that was triggering, and looking deeply in order to touch that. And then through this practice, we have touched this bigger self, this wisdom, this kinder self, and then we make any changes, because the practice is not only to calm ourselves. Compassion is something of taking care of what needs to be taken care of, and the stopping and the pausing allows us to take care of what needs to be taken care of from a place of depth, from a place of freedom, from a place of love and understanding, instead of from a reactionary posture of the habitual patterns that Valerie reminded us of, that we've kind of taken in inculcating us, and kind of what comes immediately if we don't have a practice of mindfulness, if we don't have a practice of pausing and looking deeply, embracing, and then understanding and seeing the roots of what else is there. It's really looking to see what else is there, because it's never just what immediately is in front of us. There is always more than the word and the posture. There's something, there's a place it's coming from.
Thanks, Marisela. Kaira Jewel, let me go back to you, because you offer in the book a practice I think will be immediately resonant to everybody listening, which is something about being mindful with your electronic devices. So it's like co-opting this vector of distraction and turning it into something a little bit more positive. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So when I was leading teen retreats, we would do this with them because they had to give up their phones for the week, and it was quite a traumatic thing at times for them. I mean, for all of us, right? But I saw it firsthand, this kind of difficulty of parting with this. It feels like an extension of our own bodies, right? And then we really wanted to take care at the end of this week-long mindfulness retreat for young people. We had a collective meditation of turning our phones back on together after, in this case, we'd actually been in the wilderness for 10 days, hiking, backpacking through the wilderness. So, we passed everyone's phones out and we just held them for a little bit off. They were all off. And there was mindful guidance. Let's breathe. Let's notice right here before you even turned your phone on. What are the, what are the drives? What are you excited about? What are you worried about? What are you, where does, maybe craving or comparing mind already start before we've even turned it on? Right. And then it was, okay, now we all turned it on together. And then we didn't look at the screen. We just felt it, the weight of the phone, the feel of the phone in the hands. And again, a pause. I think the key word in this, session is pause, right? Just feel, notice. Notice all the things that jump. It's like 100 horses inside, raring to go as soon as you turn it on, right? Your mind wants to go in so many different directions. But the pause allows you to hold that, to notice it, to notice all the ways we're being pushed. And then we all looked at our phones together. And we noticed, where were our eyes drawn? Where did we first want to click? Was it messages? Was it an app? Was it, Snapchat? Whatever. And then we all did one thing on our phones together. So we all either opened a chat or an email or checked one thing. And then we stopped again and we noticed. And people were sharing out loud what was happening for them in their bodies, in their minds. So it was a very powerful group practice of what are the drives, what are the things that can just come up from, from the depths that we're not even aware of, and suddenly we're in their grips. We're totally, identified with these things. And so any of us can do this as a practice to just slow things down. This can be when you wake up in the morning and maybe you do whatever you do. I know for many of us, it is reach for the phone first thing. But whatever it is that you do first, if you do something before you pick up the phone, come to your phone with intentionality. So you can pick it up if it's off, or even if it's on. You can not look at it yet, but just feel the weight of it in your hand. Notice your body before your mind gets, sucked into the mind of this device. Like, to actually notice, what are your motivations? What are your intentions? I shared with a friend who has this practice of before she reaches for her phone, she tries to get in touch with what is motivating me to do this. And it's amazing how often she shared it's boredom or loneliness or some wish to escape something unpleasant that's arising. So even right in this practice, to just before we even engage with the phone, just to notice what's driving us. What is it that's, do we want to check the news? Are we, wanting to check in with someone that we love, or is it, something more distracted, just let me just look at it, just to look at it, to have something, there's so many different, so we can really, with the pause, with just holding the phone, already a lot can be triggered. So we can just be with that, and then we can note that, recognize it, and then kind of make a decision. Well, is this what I want to reward? This motivation, is this really what I want to be feeding? Or do I want to come to my phone out of some other different intention? So then, we can interact with the phone, turn on whatever it is that we want to see, and try to do that slowly enough that we are tracking what's coming up. So, I know this is so hard for me to just do one thing on my phone, right? It's like one thing leads to the next thing, or I get distracted. This thing's showing up. Let me attend to this. But actually, now I've forgotten the whole reason why I wanted to use my phone to begin with, right? So just noticing all that, right? Noticing, and maybe having that as a challenge. Like, if you have the idea, I'm just going to answer this one email, or I'm going to send this one text, or I'm going to check the weather, just do that and put it down. Notice how the urge is to then, I'm checking the weather. Why don't I also, look at my calendar? Or, it's not that any of these things aren't helpful, useful things to do throughout the day, but just to notice the way that push we've all been talking to, that way that we get pushed by our habit energy, by, the whole wave, phones and social media and, everything online has been created precisely to grab our attention and pull us out of ourselves, to literally pull our attention out of ourselves, out of our own experience, to notice that, to be present with that, and to reclaim our attention for ourselves and for what we want to put our attention on, not where, capitalism, our culture of constantly doing and buying and consuming wants us to put our attention on.
Yeah, these practices are all countercultural, radical, really, or as the Buddha said, against the stream. Let me go back to you for a second, Valerie. This is not an explicit practice within the book, like it's not, it doesn't have its own section, but I do see a recommendation throughout the book, which again is called Healing Our Way Home. I do see an explicit recommendation throughout the book to journal as part of meditation practice. And that actually is not something I've seen much of in the meditation books that I've looked at. Generally, journaling isn't connected to a meditation practice that explicitly, and maybe that's just something I've missed in my time in the meditation circles. And so I'd be curious to hear you say a little bit more about how we can mix meditation and journaling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a great question. Several things come to mind. Part of the practice of mindfulness is to alleviate suffering, right? And so what we're pointing to are practices, resources that we can do that help to alleviate suffering. What mindfulness can also do is help us toward greater clarity, greater discernment. And so the practice of journaling, or some people call it mindful writing, is really a practice of discernment, which is strengthening a human faculty that we all have. To not just, should I turn left or should I turn right, but asking bigger and deeper questions about one's values, sense of life purpose, life meaning. We're in a time of tremendous polarization, tremendous transition. And so we're in a time where people are asking themselves a lot of questions. How should I vote? Who is being truthful? What is truthful for me? And so part of the practice of first of all, creating the space and time to ask oneself these big questions of how do I feel? What is important and meaningful? I think these are this practice is hugely important in developing a sense of one's own discernment, so that we are led not by what's the latest thing, who's speaking at the moment, but as the theologian Howard Thurman has said, our own inner authority, our own sense of grounded stability. And so that is created by a kind of purposefulness. And I'm not talking about like taking even a half hour to do this. One of the practices that I like to do in the morning is, sometimes it's maybe 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. I might read something that's inspiring, even if it's a sentence or two. And then I'll ask myself, what am I feeling? What's coming up for me? And that by being able to connect with my own feelings, it kind of points in the direction of the kind of action that I want to take, and knowing that it's a reminder. Okay, I'm here to do good or to be of service in this day, and kind of sets a compass and sets a direction. And before we get thrown off course with the 100,000 things that come up in the course of a day. So it's really pointing to what Kaira Jewel and Marisela have said. It's about reclaiming our sense of attention in an attention deficit economy. And it's moving from these habituated reactionary patterns. I was reading something the other day that said that something like 70% of all the behavior that we enact in the course of a day, 70%, maybe it's higher than that, is habituated, like brushing your teeth, drinking coffee in the same way, taking the same walk, all of these things. And so when we interject these moments, that these tiny little practices, these little resources, they're a way of reclaiming our own individuality, our own humanity, and saying, okay, this is the direction that I want to go in today. And again, I'm not talking about even taking a half hour to do it. Just a few minutes, I think, can be really beneficial.
Do you recommend journaling, like pairing it with your meditation, right before, right after, to either, I could imagine journaling right before meditation would help you get some of your discursive or anxious thinking out of your head and onto a page, and maybe clear up a little bit more bandwidth for your practice. I could imagine doing it after meditation would help process whatever came up for you during the session. Are any of these words coming out of my face hole making sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is quite an individual thing, and maybe a neuroscientist might have a different perspective on that. But I think the most important thing is setting aside the time of saying, this is the time that, and being intentional about it. That's what's most important. Whether it comes before or after, I think is almost incidental. For me personally, what I have found to be beneficial is to read something inspiring. Like it could just be a fragment of a poem that I find inspiring, and then asking myself, or reminding myself, more importantly, like, what is it? how do I really want to be on this day? So, and here's a bit of vulnerability, because this is not fully worked out. One of the things that I'm working on is really showing my vulnerability, showing my emotions more. I for much of my career was as a lobbyist and a lawyer, and I took on that kind of rugged individuality, get it done, and just legacies of my parents and all of that. And so one of the things that I'm really working on is, how can I be a more vulnerable person today? What would that look like? And sometimes that means saying, I really don't know. And letting that, really sitting with that, or saying, hey, I really need to talk with somebody. Would you have time? That's like super vulnerable for me. But there's a part of me that knows that that is the place of growth and healing for me. How do I know that? That has come through this process of discernment, of taking a few moments several times a week to ask myself these questions, which is like something that we often just don't do.
Well said. Marisela, let me get back to you, because there's another practice you talk about in the book, which I hadn't really ever occurred to me before. It's called reflecting on your early spiritual influences. And by the way, just to say that in the book you explicitly recommend that this be paired with journaling. So can you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Before I say something specific about that, I think what's important to share is this understanding of meditation and mindfulness, because I think it is a book that really invites people into adapting Buddhist practices to meet them where they are. And this is a very deep wisdom of our teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, that when Buddhism comes into a space, a population, there's going to be some adaptability. And so I'm hearing a little bit of, when you share about, well, I don't know meditation to be this, the reflection, or I don't know meditation to be the journaling. And I think the brilliance of Thich Nhat Hanh and other teachers in bringing Buddhism to the West has been, how do we meet the population it's in now? And not just the population, but the time, the 21st century, and all the ways that we do that. So same as Kaira Jewel shared about the phone, the device meditation, the looking deeply into the device, so as to know what it really is. That is the practice, right? Looking deeply to know what is really is, and in so doing, knowing what is our story with it. Is it a story we want to continue? Or is it the story we want to change? That's the deep looking that brings the transformation and the healing. And so all these practices is really about bringing the dharma without saying the word dharma, and bringing Buddhism without saying the word Buddhism into spaces, and meeting people where they are, which I believe this book does beautifully. It's in meeting people where they are, sharing where we are and how we've come through the practice, and following the practices to heal and transform, and in the process of healing and undoing the suffering and the result of the suffering, voila. we have clarity, and we have spaciousness, and we have vulnerability, and now the wisdom pours out of us. Well, it doesn't always pour out of me, yet I do see in those moments of spaciousness and clarity, I do see, and I get the insight, and it might go away the very next second, and yet it's the place that brings us into the deep teachings of generosity and discipline and patience, the 6 paramitas, or all the teachings that in these daily, everyday mindful practices we are actually living into. So I think in general, the journaling is like that, and the different practices are like that. So I answered this, I think, the second part first, around also pairing the journaling with the practice. So the early spiritual influences is something I think that's near to me, and probably to many, because many of us are Buddhist converts in the West. We're not born in countries where this was the foundational, even cultural, cultural foundation. And so just coming back into, where did we first touch spirit? So asking ourselves that, reflecting, what did you, when we first heard the word spirit, what conjured up? So in the process of writing this book, and our conversations, our dialogue, we each reflected on what was our early spiritual teachings, if you will, and we all come from Christian backgrounds, so to speak, and so coming back to that, touching. It's a nice practice to bring us forward and to see the interconnection, the non-separateness of all the spiritual teachings, because that's what I saw, right? So when I shared about when I first felt spirit is in a Catholic church, a little tiny Catholic church, and the depth of that sense of there was something greater than myself in that little church that was cultivated from people coming in and sharing their pain and suffering and putting it down at the foot of God, at the feet of God and Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and the Lady of Guadalupe, and all that got created, that energy that came, the spirit that came forward when people laid their hearts bare. To see that that's so similar to what I'm practicing now. when I practice in Buddhism, when I touch the earth, when I reconnect with the elements, that's the same spirit. When I drop into a flower, I feel so connected to something so much greater than myself. I am not alone. The earth is with me. When I listen to the rain, and I drop into that I can only hear the rain because it's dropping on something. And so that interconnection again, that's the same sense and spirit I felt in that little church as a child. And so this practice is really to help us not separate, not discriminate, to see, even though I now practice as a Buddhist person, and the practices and the teachings that are in my life and foundational for my transformation and trying to be the kindest person I can be, I can still touch the depth of what that really means. What is it? What's spirit? What's this greater than self? What's this interconnectedness? So the practice is really to just notice what's influencing us now, what influenced us then, And in the process of doing that, we'll see, just like I came to see that connection in where I first noticed spirit, and that it stayed with me. And then when I could reconnect with that again, now through Buddhism, right? Now through these practices and these teachings. So then I follow that. And who knows, maybe in 20 years, the way I reconnect with that will be a different spiritual tradition. So it's really not getting caught, right? Not getting caught in the ideology. As the Buddha said, you're going to even have to put down these teachings at some point to get free, right? Non-attachment. So the journaling is similar to what Valerie shared. It's really continuing that and noting that and using whatever means is at your disposal. Some people connect with things through writing more easily. For some, it's through moving their bodies. They move out the teaching. They breathe out the teaching. For some, it's write out the teaching, or they sing out the teaching, or they play an instrument out the teaching. And so we can't disconnect from anyone and their way of being. It's a real beautiful way. I think that the teachings can be spread because it's really not about getting people to be a Buddhist. It's it's really about helping people figuring out what's their path of freedom from that suffering.
Kaira Jewel, let me come back to you for one last practice to discuss. And there's a practice that you guide in the book called a meditation for loving our own skin. And maybe this is a good time to talk not only about that practice, but also about some of the genesis and goal of this new book, which again, just to remind everybody, is called Healing Our Way Home, Black Buddhist Teachings on Ancestors, Joy, and Liberation.
Yeah. Well, really, this book was Valerie coming to us and saying, we really need to write a book together, and our voices need to be heard as Black Dharma teachers in this tradition. And I think she was really pointing to, that the need for folks of all backgrounds, of all races, of all genders who, haven't heard these voices enough, voices like ours. And so, while we definitely, a big focus of the book is to really help these teachings be more accessible to more folks of color, to BIPOC folks, and many other groups that haven't been as welcomed or haven't seen themselves represented in Buddhist teachers, Buddhist institutions. We also, really wanted to you spoke so beautifully, Valerie, about vulnerability. We really wanted to let folks in to our experience, to be part of the kind of explorations we were having together around our various forms of identity and family backgrounds and spiritual backgrounds and what has shaped us. So the loving our skin meditation really came from the same place. It just came, Marisela and I both lead a BIPOC weekly meditation group. We take turns leading. It's been going since the beginning of the pandemic, pretty much. So 4 years almost now, every Thursday. And it just came one day as I was leading the group, where as we were, exploring what is the biological kind of physical experience of having skin, like really appreciating all the ways that skin, has changed, how it, first started forming in our mother's womb and how it grew with us and changed. And how it heals when there's a wound, how there's so much intelligence in our skin. Then it just began to evolve to really meditating on the ways our skin comes from our ancestors and the messages that our ancestors have been given, that we have been given in our society, that there's something wrong with our skin, whether it's too dark, too light, too, hairy, too, somehow that there's something that's not okay with our skin. I mean, that's just such a fundamental area of our Western culture where really we have classified people according to their skin color and, phenotype. And so much harm, so much suffering has come about because of our skin. And so then it just became a meditation on what messages have we received, have our ancestors, parents, grandparents received because of what our skin looks like, because of its color, because of its texture. And then to really hold whatever emotions were there, very, very lovingly, very compassionately, this recognition of all that our ancestors have endured because of racism, because of white supremacy, because of colonialism, the wounds that have been passed on, and so to really just be with those in a deeply present way, and then to claim for ourselves the truth that there's absolutely nothing nothing wrong, nothing inferior, nothing, divergent about any of our skin. That it's this incredibly beautiful human reality, and to really honor it, to honor all that our ancestors have endured and passed on to us through our skin, to honor the wisdom in our skin, to honor the creativity, resilience, power of our skin, and to really claim that we can feel fully at ease in our own body, that we can feel good in our skin, to just open up that possibility. Because I think one of the great gifts of meditation is it flushes out what's unconsciously ruling us from below. I say below, but it's really a metaphor, right? From the depths of our consciousness, that there are all these things that are operative, but meditation shines a light on them so that we're not in their grips. We're not unconsciously living out some harmful story. So the meditation is an attempt to get us, to that place of seeing, are there things that I believe deep down about my skin, or that my ancestors have passed on to me, that was forced onto them, beliefs about inferiority, superiority, what belongs, what doesn't belong, what's okay, what's not okay. And to really hold that, honor that, work through that, and to be able to be at peace with who we are, whatever our society may tell us, whatever the media and images and predominant narratives are. But to actually feel that right in this moment, there's nothing wrong with who I am and with how I look, and with, from the inside, to feel that we so often look at ourselves, in the mirror as from the outside. What do other people see, right? But to actually claim that from within, that all is well right here.
We were talking before we started the interview that one of the pieces of we were talking about the fact that one of the pieces of feedback that you've gotten from people who've read your book is that it's kind of like and this is from non-BIPOC people, you were saying that there's this, it's very interesting to be able to listen in on a conversation that people who look like me don't often get to be included in, and I definitely got that from the parts of the book that I looked at. And there was one, and Valerie, I'm going to throw this at you. There was one term that I believe you used that I thought was hilarious in a kind of searing way. The inner Chad.
Yes. Oh, so glad you picked up on that one. Yeah. So the story behind the inner Chad, I facilitate a monthly group of women of color who are in big law, meaning they are partners or senior associates in international law firms. So by virtue of this job, it's extremely stressful. And so every month we get together for like an hour and a half, something like that, and we talk about the skills of how to be a corporate lawyer, hold this identity as a woman of color in a dominant world of big law that was not designed for women of color. It was actually this structure of many of these big international law firms were designed by people that do not look like them, and actually was formed based on an outdated model of, and this is going to be quite gendered, so I'm just signaling that, where you had one stay-at-home spouse, maybe a woman, and you had one person that went out and was the breadwinner, so-called, and earned the money, and somebody else stayed home and took care of the kids and took care of the house. That model really doesn't exist for many, many people. And so one of the participants was talking about how frustrating it was to really trying to communicate to many partners, many lawyers who didn't look like them, where they didn't share maybe boating or yachting or playing golf or playing tennis or some of these things. And so how could they find the same confidence that their colleagues that didn't look like them? Where could they find that in themselves? And so this one participant, this woman of color, said, well, you have to develop your inner Chad. It's like your inner white boy, quite frankly. And you just have to develop that. And you got to show them your inner white boy, your inner Chad. And I said, yeah, that's what we all have to develop. That we describe it in the book as, I think, ontological expansiveness. I know that's a big term for saying, like, take up the space, right? Claim the space. And so it became a running joke in our group that, we each have to find that inner Chad within ourselves. And to the point of Kaira Jewel and Marisela, whether we identify as a person of color, an indigenous person, a white person, and an Asian person, whatever our ethnic background, our race, our culture, we all need to develop that sense of inner okayness, right? That inner solidity, inner love, inner self-confidence. And these practices, these resources, this path that we're talking to is really a way to do that. It's the building blocks of mindfulness that lead to a kind of inner concentration that then manifests in insight. We then realize, oh yeah, I remember who I am. I remember why I'm here. I know which direction I'm going.
Speaking as a Chad, as somebody who has an abundance of unearned confidence, I felt very seen. And I also feel like the inner Chad is quite different from what you're talking about, which is like a real wisdom and a confidence that comes from something really, truly earned. Wisdom, the capacity to pause, the capacity to understand, to see things clearly, and yeah, it just seems worth noting that difference.
Yeah, and Dan, we can often sabotage that. We can second guess ourselves. I believe that is innate, that we have that capacity. This is the beauty of mindfulness. We don't have to go to the store and buy that. We come built with that. But it's all the construct. It's all the systems and structures that cast doubt. And then we sabotage that. And so part of the work is reclaiming. It's an excavation.
Kaira Jewel Lingo, Marisela Gomez, Valerie Brown. Great to have all three of you on the show. Again, that book is Healing Our Way Home, Black Buddhist Teachings on Ancestors, Joy, and Liberation. We will put a link to that in the show notes, and we'll put links to the websites and other resources that our three guests today have put out into the world. Thank you again for coming on.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, Dad.